Good morning and welcome to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. I am here every weekend on these stations at this time to bring you, the landowner, valuable information that you need regarding natural gas development here in Pennsylvania. At the Clark Law Firm, my focus is on landowner, oil and gas right owner representation. I do not, have not, and will not represent oil and gas companies, pipeline companies, or any companies in the energy industry. I focus my representation on landowner issues, including but not limited to, classic lawyer speak, including but not limited to oil and gas lease representation, negotiation, reviews of oil and gas leases to make sure that you as the landowner, if you have a lease, understand what you have, what you signed, what you may expect in the future. A lot of times people have oil and gas leases. They never really understood the lease when they signed it. Sometimes even if they had attorneys at the time, didn't understand. Now, maybe they're getting close to the point where they're questioning, is their lease expiring or will it continue? And they're not sure what's going on. Get calls for that, do lease reviews. And, it's typically an hour. By the time I look at the lease, we have our call, answer all the client's questions and concerns, explain everything to them. You're talking about an hour of time, and I've done a lot of these. And I'll tell you, I've never had a client or a landowner get done with this call and say, I don't know what the heck I did that for. Usually, it's very appreciative and say, hey, look, thank you so much. I've really learned a lot in things that I didn't understand. And I don't say that, it's a fine balancing line. I'm not saying that to say, oh, wow, this guy's real high on himself. He must think he's really great. It's not necessarily, that's not the case. I'm saying that because I don't want people to be afraid to reach out to say, hey, I'm confused. And it's sad that we have many, many landowners out there that are confused, don't understand, don't know where to turn, don't know who to call. This isn't just a commercial, but the idea is hey, I did a lease review. Last week I talked about quite a bit. I talked about when does a lease terminate? You have a 5-year lease. What has to happen within those 5 years in order for that lease to continue on or to terminate? Interestingly, after last week's show, just during this past week, I had a lease review with a client. Landowner had called and said, hey, my lease is expiring. I want to see what's going on. Can you help me out? We have a call. He sends all his information and go over everything in preparation for the conference. And lo and behold, this landowner is actually already receiving royalties from a portion of this person's property. So that's a good thing. The person, though, thought since they had a 5-year lease that their lease was going to be terminating, that they were going to have to enter into a new lease, and wanted to find out what their rights and options were. Well, good news, bad news in that type of case. Bad news is, hey, look, and it depends on how you look at it. What was perceived maybe to be bad news was that, hey, your lease is not going to terminate because the company conducted operations within the 5 years. And if you remember last week, operations could be any number of things. Doesn't need to be actually drilling on the ground. Doesn't mean that you have to be receiving royalties. In many leases, it can be as little as the company applying for or obtaining a permit to drill from DEP. So we got to look, when we're doing leases, we want to try to solidify, to make a black and white line. Company, what do you need to do in order to hold this lease? What do you need to do within the 5 years to continue this lease onward? We'd like to have, ideally, you'd like to have royalties being received, or at least maybe drilling itself. And sometimes we can do that and sometimes we can't, but we always want to do the best we can, as, of course, obviously, to get the best agreement we can. Well, this gentleman thought that his lease was expiring. What he perceived at first was bad news. Hey, your lease isn't expiring. But what turned out to be great news for this individual, because the lease that's not expiring is a lease that he has a 21% royalty. 21% royalty. If his lease expired and there was nothing that occurred within the 5 years, Well, you're sure as heck not going to get a 21% royalty lease at the present time. And where his property was located, he would probably be looking at around a 15% lease. So we're talking about 25% or a little bit more less royalties. As far as he has 21 now, he could get 15 with a new lease, probably not higher, but maybe lower. So you're talking about 6 percentage points that he would lose in future royalties. So that's really, in my opinion, very good news that your lease didn't expire in this case. Take it a step further. The other great news for this person, royalties are coming in. Hey, that's a great thing. Actually, this person was doing pretty well with royalties in a pretty good area. So they're doing pretty well with royalties. They're in a good area. The other part was this person had fairly substantial acreage. I'll round it up and we'll say they had 100 acres. Well, of the 100 acres, only about half were now in a unit, and this person was receiving royalty checks. So these royalty checks were pretty substantial, but what was great and what this person had no idea about because they just were never informed, well, the good news was you only have, in this case, this landowner, only had one well producing for about half of his property. We found that the other half of the property has been placed in a unit. There's drilling activity that's going to be occurring, and they're going to see additional royalties from the other approximately 50 acres that would be placed in a future unit. So we can also look at this and say, well, look, in these low, super low gas price times that we're in now, you're having one well and you're still doing very well. Excuse me there. You're still doing very well with only one well's worth of royalties, and you only have half of your property within a unit. So once you get all of your property in a unit, and once you get all of the property producing royalties, you can expect substantially more royalty. Also, once the more wells are drilled, and remember, seems elementary, but remember, you get paid royalties for all the gas that's being produced from your unit. So what does that mean? Well, if you have one well drilled and producing gas, and you're going to get royalties from that well. But if you have 2, 3, or 4 or more wells that are drilled and producing gas, well, you're going to be receiving a lot more royalties because more wells equals more gas. You get paid royalties on gas being produced. So in this case, this gentleman has now a much better picture and understanding of saying, wow, okay, I'm only in the infancy of this. I realize now my lease isn't going to terminate, which I was hoping for, but now realize, hey, that's a really good thing for me that it didn't terminate and is going to continue. I now have a realistic understanding of what may occur in the next year or so, but then I also have the insight to the future. What could I expect? What may I expect? And look, gas prices go soaring up. You're going to see drilling rigs come back into the area and drill much more aggressively. Gas prices stay low. You're going to continue to see this contraction in the industry where they're not out there drilling wells. They're not out there spending money because they don't want to spend $5 to $7 million to drill wells, not be able to sell this gas at a price where it's going to be profitable. So if they can afford, so if you can drill one well in a unit and hold all of those properties, meaning that the leases won't expire and you do not need to drill additional wells, well, that as a company makes sense. Hey, let's sit on this. It's supply and demand. We control the supply. The more gas we produce, the more supply there is out there. Well, right now there's an overabundance of supply, which has driven the price of gas way down. So what do? Let's not drill anymore. We have supply here. Let's sell our supply, and as the gas prices go up, we can start producing more. Very elementary. You're listening to All Things Marcellus with me, attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. Give my little economics lesson here in supply and demand, but it's very true. So If the prices go up, you're going to see a lot more activity. If the prices stay low, you're going to continue to see companies sit on what they have. But if they're in a situation where they have leases that are expiring, like a whole bunch of leases in a given area, you're going to see them go out there, drill a well, probably do as little as they can to hold or maintain these gas leases. And think about this. If they lose the gas lease, first, the money that they paid the people, the landowner for the gas lease, well, that's now gone. They've lost that. But also, say you have a township, pick any county you want in Pennsylvania. If you have a township and say you're a company that owns all of the leases in the township, and you have a bunch of leases expiring within a year, well, if you don't do anything to hold on to those leases, that geographical area, that large, like a whole township, which is a large geographic area, well, you may see something that big where if all those leases start to expire around the same time, maybe another company does come in. And think about, maybe you have a couple township area. Maybe you have a quarter of a county where you're having a bunch of leases expire. Well, companies don't want to lose the lease if they don't have to, especially if it's a good lease favoring the company, but they don't want to lose leases en masse across a wide area because they don't want to open the door for potentially another company to come in. So what do? Well, they go out and they drill wells, they create units. A larger unit, meaning instead of 500 acres, if you did 1,000 or 1,200 acre unit, well, the larger unit you have, the more property that you're able to hold or encompass within this unit. So you drill one well and you hold 1,200 acres. So those leases now you hold them in your pocket. They're not going to expire. So that's a better thing for you as a company, a bigger unit. Now, what can happen is, because there's not a lot of rigs in Pennsylvania now, the other thing that can happen is, well, the company says, geez, we have all of these leases in this certain county that are about to expire within this next year or two. Even if we drill wells one after another, we only have a rig or two in Pennsylvania. So, hey, look, as we look at this, we're not going to be able to get to everything. We just simply can't drill enough holes in order to unitize all of these leases. So what do we want to do? Well, how about this idea? Maybe we have a bunch of leases that are expiring in the year 2016 and we need some more time. Let's go out to those landowners. Let's ask them to extend their lease by another couple years. And by extending their lease, we can then buy ourselves, literally, they'll give you some money most likely, and buy ourselves more time. So we'll take half the county and we'll go ahead and we'll drill the bare minimum wells that we need to, and we'll meet our obligations. But in the other half of the county, we'll really push hard in order to get extensions for another couple years or so to buy us time, because multiple things. One, we don't have the resources and maybe even the capital or money to drill enough wells to cover or to hold all of these leases. So we have financial issues, but at the same time, because of the price of gas, even if we were financially in a good position and we had the money and the capital to drill these wells, even if we did, we don't want to drill them now because we don't want to sell this gas at $1 to $2 per MCF. So by getting a lease extension makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to talk about that. There's other things I'm going to talk about today, but I want to continue on this. You're listening to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark. I'm here every weekend at this time on these stations, and I'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. And again, I represent landowners, only landowners. I'm going to jump right back into this. I talked last week a lot about some basic stuff, what you may think to be basic stuff, but a lot of people are not familiar with it. And, sometimes as attorneys who deal with this all the time, you get a little bit too deep into the details, and sometimes you need to take a step back and look at the forest in that broader perspective. So what I was talking about, and I want to tie this back into this first segment. Last week I was talking about what a company needs to do within the, say, 5-year lease term in order to continue this lease for additional years beyond 5 years. And so what happens is they have to conduct operations within 5 years. Operations is generally a defined term in the lease, meaning that there'll be a definition of operations. What is operations? Well, we're going to say what it is and define it in the lease, and this is what the company has to do within 5 years. And usually, in most basic leases, simply applying for a permit for drilling is going to be enough. If that's not enough, obtaining a drilling permit, not even drilling it, just getting the permit is typically going to be enough. So I was talking a story about, after last week's show, by chance, I did a lease review for a client, new client, was just starting to get royalties, and this gentleman thought his lease was going to expire because the 5 years was coming up this year. But he was getting royalties, and because he was getting royalties, but not just because of that, because operations occurred, in this case, a lot of operations, his lease, was being held or would continue onward. Generally, they continue. So if operations occur within that 5-year term, and that's our example here, those leases, if operations occur, they'll continue typically as long as oil and gas is being produced or capable of being produced in paying quantities. Very, very important to know. So once those operations occur, as long as oil and gas is either being produced or is capable. So if they shut the well in and so it's capable of producing, well, you're still going to be held under lease. I just been working on in the last couple of weeks a lease from, I think it's either 1896 or 1897. Many times we deal with leases in the early 1900s. Don't get a lot from the 1800s, but working on one now from it's either 1896 or 1897. What's crazy is the most disturbing part for me is, my heavens, you should try to read these things. You think a regular lease is tough to read. First, you have handwriting. They're handwritten, and then you get copies from the courthouse, 115, 120 years old. Quite a challenge to say the least. But okay, so I want to plug that back to this first segment. And what I'm talking about here is, so operations occur. This gentleman at first was like, oh, shoot, I thought I was going to be able to do a new lease, but actually, sir, this is a really good situation for you because you have a 21% royalty on your lease. You also have a provision, a market enhancement provision regarding royalty calculation, which there's a split, but many companies are not taking deductions with that provision. Well, many others are. So the good thing for you is that because your lease is held, this lease is getting locked in. You've locked in your 21% royalty, which is outstanding. You've locked in this royalty calculation provision, which is beneficial to you as a landowner. So you didn't want that lease to expire, because if it did, you would have to enter into a new lease if you were going to lease, and you're never, ever going to get those same terms again. So I would much rather have my lease in that situation held than it expiring. You're listening to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. And so we want to go back to what I was talking about earlier in that first segment. So what you find is we have these 5-year leases, and because the supply of gas is so abundant and the price is so low, you have companies saying, boy, in order to hold these leases, we have to do something. And ultimately, they're going to have to drill at some point, and there's going to be time restrictions on that. So what do? Well, they're either going to go out and drill a well, in a lot of cases just cap it, but they go out and drill a well, form a unit. Ideally, you'd like to have a big unit because bigger units mean less wells that you have to drill. So if you have a 1,000-acre, 1,200-acre unit, you drill one well, you cap it, you've held all of that property under your leases that you have with those people, those landowners. So that's a good thing. But the market is so bad. the lack of rigs, drilling rigs in Pennsylvania is down. So companies are saying, well, boy, even if we use this one rig or two rigs that we have active, even if we use it, we drill well after well after well, and we create these 1,000-acre, 1,200-acre units, we're still going to run out of time. We have a bunch of leases that are expiring. I gave that example. We're going to say in a county, we have a bunch of leases that are all going to be expiring within the next year or two. And so no matter how we do this with drilling, no matter how active we keep this one or two rigs that we have, nonstop we keep them drilling, we're still not going to be able to drill enough holes and create enough units to hold all of these leases. We're concerned because we don't want these leases to expire as a gas company because we think we entered into good leases for us, so we don't want to lose those. We paid bonus money for those leases. We don't want to lose that money. And if we have a whole bunch of leases, and I mean a bunch of leases, not talking about a couple scattered here and there, if you're going to miss out, if you're going to lose hundreds of leases in a given area, well, you may be opening the door, maybe, for another company to come in and scoop up some of those leaseholds because your lease is expired. Now, if you're talking about a couple, well, other companies aren't going to be that interested. But if you have hundreds of leases across some townships or in an area of a county, well, that may get other companies interested. So they don't want to lose any of their share of those leaseholds in that given area. So what do? You either bring in more well or rigs and drill more wells, hold more property by drilling. That's going to cost you a lot of money. Or you go to the landowners who have leases expiring in the next year or two and you say, hey, we'd like to extend your oil and gas lease. Instead of it being a 5-year lease, we'd like to add 2 or 3 years onto it. We want to make it a 7 or 8-year lease. What does that do? It gives the company 2 or 3 more years, however long the agreement is for, gives the company that additional time to drill a well or to conduct operations so they can spread it out. So they don't need to keep drilling wells at $5 to $7 million a clip. They can extend the leases. So what are they going to say to you as a landowner? Well, hey, landowner, gas prices are really, really low. You don't want us to drill now because if we drill and we have to sell your gas, you're hardly going to get anything. And they'll say, another thing they'll say is, well, if you don't agree to extend this, we're going to have to go ahead and drill a well. But when we drill this well, we're going to go ahead and cap it and shut it in, and you're not going to get any money for at least, say, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever that time frame is going to be. And there's different reasons it could be a different time frame. But the point is the landman's going to say, look, we'll drill these wells or a well if we have to, but the company's going to just shut it in. So why do you care, landowner? Well, the company landman's saying, I hold in my hand a lease extension. We will give you 300, 500, maybe 1,000, maybe even more in some cases. You know where you are. But they'll offer you some money to extend it 2 or 3 years. So here's how this conversation goes. Hey, landowner, if you do not agree to this extension, you and your neighbors don't agree, well, what we're going to have to do is drill a well, we're going to cap it, and you're not going to see royalties until we open it up, which may be 3, 4, 5, who knows, maybe even more years into the future. So as it's shut in, you're going to get maybe $5 per acre of property that you have in these shut-in units, which isn't going to be very much money. So you're going to only get that little bit of money, where your other alternative is we'll give you this lease extension where we'll buy 2 or 3 more years, say, to your lease, and we'll give you, whether it be 300, 500, 1,000 or more dollars per acre to extend the lease to give us some more time. So by doing the extension, we're going to give you a big chunk of money right now. If you don't do the extension, we're not going to let your lease die off. We'll drill a well, we'll cap it, and we'll only give you $5 per acre per year because we're going to shut that well in. Now, is the company bluffing? Are they telling the truth? That's where you got to get into some much more detail investigation, look at your situation, look at what we've seen before. What have we seen from this company? What do we anticipate? What is your personal risk tolerance? Well, what are your neighbors doing? Has everybody else agreed? Are you the last holdout? Does that give you additional leverage? There are so many things that you need to look at behind that first step. We got to go to step 20 to 30 to really look for clues, information, tidbits, perhaps, that help to guide you to make a better decision. So it gets really personal. It gets really individual for your case. And that's the type of thing with the radio show. I can't say do this, don't do this, because we got to look at your situation. But what I can say is give you that overview of why we're seeing extensions. Why companies don't want to see these leases expire, and the importance of, whether it's me or somebody else, getting good quality advice to understand everything that you need to know about that extension. And also, you have to understand what the market is today. There are many, many times where I say to people, look, you don't want this particular lease to expire because you're going to be better off with the lease you have in hand now than if you have to go out and try to get a new lease. However, there are other times where I say, please throw away that extension paperwork as soon as possible, or don't sign it, because once your lease expires, we can get you a better lease most likely and explain all the reasons why. So you want your old lease to expire. In some cases, the smartest thing, no-brainer, smartest thing, let your lease expire. Other cases, the last thing you want to do is let your lease expire. You got to know the difference. And you don't take your advice from the company landman. Why? Because they work for the company, not for you, the landowner. You need your own advice. You need to make sure you're getting the assistance, high quality, credible information to make the right decision for you. I swear, I've seen many, many people make the wrong decisions and lose millions and millions of dollars in this process. And I'm talking about combined. Certainly there are individuals who've made the wrong decision, bad advice, bad information, were afraid to reach out and get good quality information, that ended up making a terrible decision that will cost them millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars going forward. Unfortunately, there are many of those examples out there, many that I personally have seen. So we want to make sure that we avoid that. And again, not to make it a commercial, but one of these things we've been doing so much of recently are these kind of evaluation and reviews to look at your exact situation as a landowner and say, okay, here's what's being asked here. I've seen this however many times before. In your situation, here's what you need to know, in my opinion. Here's what I would suggest. Here's maybe what I would do. Or these are the critical factors that you need to weigh. Your risk tolerance, your ability to say, well, you know what, I'm going to roll these dice. And if I get nothing or if I get way less, I'm willing to do that. But I want to roll the dice because I think I can do a lot better. Well, maybe you're that kind of guy or lady. You want to gamble. You're willing to gamble. You're willing to tolerate a lot of risk. Or maybe you're like, well, I got a bird in the hand. I don't care if there's 10 birds out there in the bush. I'm good with this bird in my hand. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to make sure that we get you the best possible deal. If we can do something to make it better as far as financially, well, we're going to do that. But we're going to keep in mind your risk tolerance. And we're certainly going to get you the best possible language that you can get as well. I'm up against my second break. You're listening to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. I'm here every single weekend at this time on these stations. I'll be back after this break. Welcome back to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. Again, here every weekend at this time on these stations. And at the Clark Law Firm, I kind of broke from my script. If you're a regular listener, you'd know. Broke from my script. I just want to remind everybody again, look, only oil and gas right owners, Pennsylvania landowners, any and all representation related to oil and natural gas development here in Pennsylvania. We're talking about gas leases. We're talking about gas lease extensions some today to extend your oil and gas lease. Do a lot of work with that. As markets change, as conditions change, if there's a lot of drilling, I find myself doing a lot more work related to well pads, surface use agreements, pipeline agreements. As drilling kind of slows down and the market is so bad, I see myself now, or I find myself, I don't see it, but I find it. I see it when I do it, I guess. But I find myself now doing a lot more with oil and gas lease modifications, amendments to buy more time for the company, oil and gas lease extensions, doing a lot of work. And I continue to do a lot of work with pipelines because pipelines are still lacking. We're still following up. Now, with this slowdown in activity, we've seen slowdowns in pipelines as well, but there's still pipeline projects that are being purchased. Right-of-ways and easements are being purchased now, being constructed. So I continue to do a lot of work with pipelines, especially, I do probably, as much pipeline or more, probably more for landowners than about anyone, but doing a lot more too. We're seeing that rise, and I've talked recently about these FERC, which is FERC, which stands for Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And what it is FERC is the governmental agency that oversees interstate pipelines. The tough thing with the FERC pipeline projects, or interstate from state to state, is that they ultimately, if approved by FERC, these projects will have the power of eminent domain and condemnation. So we need to handle these types of cases differently than we handle other more normal or more common type of pipeline right-of-way agreement, where it's an agreement that the company would never get. No matter what, they would never receive the authority of eminent domain and condemnation. So we got to identify the FERC line. Then we need to, and that's not difficult, then we need to say, let's get a plan in place to make sure that we do the best we can here. Get you the most money, get you the best terms. Multiple projects, the Penn East, getting more and more calls from the Penn East project. If you're contacted, Tennessee Pipeline, Transco, Penn East, Sunoco, Atlantic Sunrise, any of those projects or more, any of them, you can give me a call, but you need to talk to somebody soon. If you're talking about the Atlantic Sunrise, where you're getting closer to the time where it's anticipated that the company will get their FERC approval, that is a critical time for you as a landowner. If you haven't talked to somebody and you're on that Atlantic Sunrise project, you better talk to somebody. Because we're back to a poor decision very easily. Tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, as well as a lesser agreement, an agreement that's not going to be as strong. So you don't want to just sign. There's things that you got to look at. So, and again, I don't want to go too far down this path here today. Sure, I'll talk about it at other times, and I have in other shows. But I'm telling you, please, whether it's me or somebody else, if you have a FERC pipeline project, whether you're just presented with it, whether it's been out there for 9 months, a year or more, call me, call somebody. Get an evaluation, a consultation. Make sure you understand everything. Get yourself a plan and a strategy and say, how am I going to address this? It's not a good situation in my experience. Virtually never is it a good situation. So what do? We make the best we can out of any situation. And we make sure that you're informed, you're educated, you understand your rights and your options, and you maximize your circumstances to the greatest benefit you can. I said, I've talked a lot about these FERC lines. I'll just say, if you have this, I'm going to break out commercial alert here. You can contact the office, 570-307 0702. The Tennessee Gas Company has this Northeast Energy Direct project, which is impacting this Penn East project. A lot of people in northeastern Pennsylvania. I think I'm going to just look at my notes here. I think there's 400. I don't want to miss the. Oh, no, I'm sorry. 41 miles of pipeline that they're looping on the Tennessee 300 line system in Pennsylvania. That's 41 miles. That's quite a bit of pipeline there. And they just filed for their FERC application here in November. They anticipate getting approval next fall. This is Tennessee, Kinder Morgan. So what does that mean? Well, that means the clock is ticking. Get a plan together. Get a plan in place. I don't want to give anyone specific advice, do this, do that, other than my advice is always become educated, always get assistance. You will do better, and especially if you have good quality assistance. But I would say, please, if you're approached and you get the first offer from any of these companies, I would say I wouldn't generally recommend that you sign these agreements. You absolutely should consult with an attorney, understand this isn't just an advertisement for me. This is about people who are signing agreements and leaving tens of thousands of dollars on the table, leaving property protections and limitations on the table. If you sign these agreements, they generally allow for multiple pipelines. Many people signed pipeline right-of-way agreements in the 50s with Tennessee Gas or Tennessee Pipeline or Gas Pipeline Company, Tennessee Gas Pipeline Company. Many people signed agreements in 1950, and they're, in a lot of cases, are no longer with us, but those agreements still are. And so what's happening is Tennessee coming back and saying, hey, under our original agreement, we're allowed to put another pipeline. And your payment is going to be, a couple bucks a foot. We got to protect against that. You got to understand your rights. This is very complicated. You have to understand. You got to get a plan together. So please don't be intimidated. Don't be intimidated to get help. Don't be afraid to get help. One of the things that we do here is these reviews and consultations. Do this a lot with these type of projects where we speak early on. I explain the system. I explain how it works. I explain here's where your type of expectations should be based upon experience of doing this, and you decide how you want to move forward. You're always going to be better off, in my opinion, and it's just been my experience. So please, most importantly, do not be afraid. Get assistance, get help. Whether you think you do or not, you probably do need the help, and it's going to be help if you have the right person. It's going to be very beneficial to you. So please, if you want to learn more here, you can contact us again. Sorry for the commercial alert, but it's a big issue where people are signing really bad agreements, and a phone call can make this a lot better for you in most cases. So if nothing else, you get really good information. You can always call the office, learn more. You don't have to do anything. Learn more about it. Speak with Marcia. It's 570-307-0702. 570-307-0702. And I want to take this time too, probably the latest I've ever talked about it in the show. Go to the websites. Go to our websites. I'm very proud of them. I think they have outstanding landowner information for you, the landowner. You can go to the primary gas site, which also has a lot about pipelines on there. You can go to pagasleaseattorney.com. That's pagasleaseattorney.com. And go to the pipeline site, our sister site, pipelineattorney.com. Just go to pipelineattorney.com. And if you missed, I said I talked about these FERC pipelines. I've talked about a lot of pipeline projects. I'm going to talk about pipelines more in the weeks to come. But whether you're interested more in lease extensions, lease modifications, any issue, unitization, royalty issues, pipelines, well pads, compressor sites, go to pagasleaseattorney.com. Read about them. Also, go to the radio segment. What we do is we have not all, I should say. I've been doing the show since August of 2010. So we have hours upon hours of radio shows available and indexed by topic up on the site. So at your leisure, go check out pagasleaseattorney.com. Listen to the radio show. Go find a show you like. You miss any of today's show, you can go back, listen to it tomorrow morning. We'll have it up on the sites. And if you find a topic you want, you go check out that topic as well. So again, pagasleaseattorney.com, pipelineattorney.com. Really encourage you, go check those sites out. Okay, it's a good place to end this segment. You're listening to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm, here every single weekend on these stations. And I'm saying this a little different now if you listen regularly, because we're starting to broadcast on some other stations. So very excited about that as well too. I think information is good for everybody, and I think it's more than good. I think it's great. And we want to make sure that you're getting, the landowner, the information you need. So hopefully we're giving that to you. I appreciate everything. I appreciate all the listenership, and I appreciate the great comments we get. People write in the email. Thank you. Thank you a lot. I'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to circle back. Sometimes I get sidetracked. I'm going to circle back to the first segment. I was talking about a gentleman who I did a lease review and consult with over the past week. I love the guy, great experience. I love to, unfortunately with this job, sometimes you have to bring people bad news, and that's just in being a lawyer. As a lawyer, one of the great things and some of the bad things are, I love what I do, and we have this tremendous opportunity, and I don't mean it to sound corny, but it's the truth. It's this privilege and ability to help people. I mean, that's a fabulous, fabulous feeling when you know that you've helped someone, that you help them maybe economically make gains, which can be a benefit to their children, to their grandchildren, to their children's education, to their grandchildren's education, to help them with their retirement. All of these different things that we get to do as attorneys to have that opportunity. And wow, what a great thrill and what a great experience that is. And I don't know that there's a lot of jobs, there's certainly some that we could point to, but it's a really great thing about what I get to do. On the flip side, there's unfortunately sometimes you have to bring people bad news, and sometimes it's really bad news. Usually in what I'm doing now, it's not the worst news ever, but sometimes I've had to make calls and say, hey, I know you were holding out and you wanted to get more money, but unfortunately the company has now withdrawn this offer, and that $100,000, $200,000, whatever is being offered to you is now no longer being offered. And in many cases, that offer may never have didn't come back, or may never come back. So what we want to do, obviously, is avoid that situation, and that's where you give honest, quality, credible advice, and you make sure you give the client every possible piece of information that you can give them that you would want to know if you were in their circumstance, and that can help them make the best decision. So, it's a really cool thing to be able to work with people and help people, and I really, really enjoy it. I am Attorney Doug Clark, listening to All Things Marcellus. I represent landowners, and only landowners and oil and gas right owners, and again, I love what I'm doing. Now, I said I got sidetracked. Well, there I go again. I want to circle back. So I did this lease review and a consult with a new client over the past week. He thought his lease was going to expire. He was kind of excited about that. At first was a bit disappointed to hear that his lease wasn't going to expire, but then was extremely excited to hear that his lease wasn't going to expire, because he understands that he's now locked in a 21%, in this case, royalty rate. He's getting production. Future production's around the corner. He's going to make a lot of money. Well, when I do these lease reviews and consult, this gentleman also had sent in his checks, some division orders. We run the math real quick, make sure everything is good. We find mistakes with math sometimes. We want to make sure that's right. Sometimes that math can get complicated. In this case, the gentleman just started receiving royalties, and he's going to, in this case, receive royalties from 4 different companies for at least 3 separate units, not to mention how many wells will be producing in these various units. He really didn't understand any of these things coming in, and he's a very smart person, but no one ever explained it to him. he didn't have that experience. So no matter what, when he went to bed that night, he had a very good idea and an understanding of what his lease terms meant, especially the most critical ones, what to expect moving forward, and what he's seen in the past, and what do we anticipate in the years to come. And also, he's on guard for certain requests or things that may happen in the future, that if they do, he's going to give me a call, say, hey, yeah, maybe you want to talk to me about this. Maybe you need some help. Or, hey, look, you can say no. If you don't want to do this, just say no. Or, hey, look, this is something that the company is going to ultimately be able to force on you if you don't agree to something. So, and the key part is to make sure that you understand that difference. Just because the company says they can do it doesn't mean they can do it. They say they can do it. You sign a document. Well, what if they said they can do it, but they didn't have the authority to do it? Well, once you sign a document, you gave them the authority. We don't rely on them because they're working for the company, not for you. So one of the great things about this, as I was reviewing, I was looking at everything for this gentleman. He hasn't even started to get, or he started to get checks, but there's still other companies that are going to be sending him checks, which he didn't understand that either. But one thing I found, in this case, this gentleman had created a trust to put a portion, we'll say half of the royalties into a trust, and the other half of the royalty money was going to come to him individually. Well, a lot of times, since it's you as an individual, you're really seeing your checks, you're really looking at them. For the money that was going into the trust, well, maybe you as a landowner, or you're not investigating that as much. Or maybe you're just, you can't figure out these checks and you don't know what they mean. Well, one of the things that I found was, as I looked at this, was that one of the companies who was paying royalties, so they're giving 50% of the royalties to the landowner as an individual. The other 50% they're paying into a trust because that's the way this has been set up. Well, one of the things that I found was, hey, wait a second. The money that's going to you as an individual, this company is not taking any deductions for gathering and transportation fees, but the money that is going, the royalty check that's going into the trust, as you inspect that, we see that, whoa, lo and behold, there's deductions being taken. So as an example, and again, if you're in tune to this and you're looking at this, you may be able to figure it out. But what we had was, look, this is elementary. In this example, we'll say 50% was going to you, 50% was going into a trust that you created. Well, those checks, the check to you and the check to the trust by this gas company, should be essentially identical or within a penny or so of each other. Well, we see a discrepancy. Well, what's going on here? Well, we find out that the money being paid into the trust, the royalties, the company was taking deductions. The money going into the individual account or to the individual, the company was not taking deductions. Well, why was this occurring? Quite simply, company mistake, human error. When the person who was what they call coding or entering this into the system for the gas company, they made a mistake. They put in as the individual, this was the type of lease that we don't take deductions from. When they did it for the trust, they coded it wrong and they took deductions. Well, thankfully, we caught this and we caught it early. If he didn't catch, so the first check, and we were talking, first check, it was, I think, around $1,000 or so or more dollars in difference in the amount of deductions that were being taken. That's check number one. This gentleman could be getting checks for the next 50 years or more. I mean, more than 50 years. So if he never realized this, no one ever realizes this. Throughout the course of time, every payment that's being made is going to have deductions being taken, and if nobody complains and nobody does something and it's never caught or found out, that's going to occur for the lifetime of the lease. In that case, I have no doubt in the world, hundreds of thousands of dollars of differences here. So, real simple. Hey, notice this. They're taking deductions when they shouldn't be. I have somebody at that company send out an email. Hey, look, I think there was probably a mistake here. You want to present this in a very nice fashion. You explain it. You want to make it as easy as possible. And I'm very confident company's going to say, as they've done in other times, hey, we're sorry about that. We made a mistake. Thank you for pointing that out to us. We'll have it corrected. We will refund that approximately $1,000 that we shouldn't have deducted, and we'll code it in our system correctly. So now there'll never be deductions taken. So in a matter of an hour, we took care of a situation where the gentleman wasn't being paid properly, explained all the critical aspects of the lease, explained unitization, explained shut-in, explained how 4 companies are going to be paying on his lease, explained how in this case, in one of the units that he was a part of, that Chief was the operator, or the company was drilling and operating the unit, even though his lease was held by other companies. Although one unit was being operated by Chief, the other units were being operated by another company. So he was very confused about that. Again, explain the process, explain how it works. Also explain, hey, look, let me give you a realistic expectation about your property. I don't know if gas prices are going to go up or down. I certainly think they will over some time here. But, said, hey, look, now let me explain how this thing works, because he was really kind of down on some things, saying, I don't know if that's a lot of money. Well, in actuality, this case, he was doing great because he only had a portion of his property unitized. There was only one well drilled where he was getting production from, and he's on the verge of additional wells and additional property being unitized. So he's in a great position. Now we have to sit back, let this come to him, and see where gas prices go and what's going on. But now he says at the end, hey, thank you so much. I never knew these things. Nobody ever explained it to me. I feel so much more informed. I feel, much better spot of where I am and the information that I have and what to expect in the future. Again, this was a great call. Oh, and by the way, I'm really glad we're going to get this corrected where I've been paid wrong. Great situation. Worst thing is, would have explained everything and it wouldn't have been all the greatest news, but at least he would have known. So always get good quality information. I'm up against the end here. You're listening to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. I'm here again every week at this time on these stations. Have a great week, everyone.